Hello and welcome to the Tillage Edge with me, Michael Hennessy. This is your regular update for all your tillage news and advice. There is a sustained drive by the EU and national government to convert more farms to organic production and grow this market. Ireland still has a relatively small organic sector, and the number of tillage farmers within this is smaller again. As the majority of organic farmers tend to be beef and dairy farmers, all of these producers require organic concentrate, which generally are purchased off-farm. Logically, it makes sense for this feed to come from Ireland. There are obvious synergies between livestock and tillage farming around nutrient recycling, and some farmers certainly practice this type of system. However, running a stockless tillage farm is more challenging. So today I'm joined by Martin Bourke, a specialist tillage organic advisor, to chat through some of the pros and cons of converting to an organic tillage farm. Martin, I first want to chat around the direction of travel the EU is taking in terms of the amount of organic land it wants to convert. And also, how many organic tillage farmers are in Ireland at the moment?
I suppose we've all heard about this EU Green Deal and the farm to fork strategy. So there's been an ambitious target set there by the EU that we would have 25% of the land in the EU organic by 2030. And I suppose Ireland at the moment is only at about 2%, but we have a target set to get that up to 7.5% by 2027. So that's kind of where we're heading. And there's ambitious targets set, but there's also, I suppose, a lot of money. There's 256 million euro now has been put into the organic fund from the Department of Agriculture to fund the increase in this area over the next number of years. In terms of number of organic growers then at the minute, back in 2019, I have figures of 134 cereal growers, but we know that has climbed by about 25 or 30 since then. So there's roughly, I would say, 180 cereal growers, but we are anticipating an awful lot more coming in now in the next few tranches of the organic farming scheme.
Okay, well, you mentioned a fairly enormous sum there. There seems to be €1 million for every day of the year there, is there? 256 rather than 356 million. There's a big pot of money there, basically. So you say the government is going to announce a new scheme, and obviously there's payment rates associated with that. So Martin, you might just give us a little bit of detail about how this scheme is going to work.
Okay, so look, it's a 5-year scheme, and there's different rates of payment depending on how many years you are into the scheme. So in the first 2 years, if you're a tillage farmer, you will get €320 a hectare. For every hectare of tillage crops in the scheme up to 70 hectares, okay? And above that, then you would get €60 a hectare. And then in year 3 to 5, when you're fully organic, because it takes 2 years to achieve organic status to be fully certified and to be able to sell your produce organically. So when you're, I suppose, making the big bucks for your produce and you're getting the nice premium, that's when the payments come back by €50 a hectare to €270 a hectare. Now, what the department have also done is they've introduced a very nice participation payment to take part in the first place, and you'll get €2,000 upfront in the first year and €1,400 per annum each year after that. Now, what does that mean? I'll just take a 100-acre grower, 40 hectares. That would approximately bring in just shy of €15,000 in the first year. So that's quite a lot of money to come into the farm gate.
Wow, that puts quite a bit of I suppose bumpers around the system in terms of making that conversion. And I suppose, Jesus, just straight off, I would almost think that a grower of 100 acres would be kind of looking at 15,000, be kind of saying that's almost nearly the same amount of money and going to cost me in fertilizers for this year. So do you think that people are going to be looking at it in that sense, that there's huge outgoings and huge risk, I suppose, in a conventional tillage sense now? Do you think that's going to change people's minds to get into organics?
Well, I certainly think so. I was talking to one grower the other day, and he just said it was a very sobering thought. It had just dawned on him that he was going to, if he wanted to buy his fertilizer, the gun was, I suppose, effectively to his head. He was going to have to fork out €100,000 to make a decision. Was he going to fork it out, which you wouldn't normally have to at this time of the year, to spend on an investment, and he hasn't even planted the seeds yet. And it sent a shudder down his spine, he told me. And I think you will have seen recently at the National Grain Forum that, the mood and sentiment among the farming audience, they're very concerned over the high fertilizer prices, over availability. Will it be there in the spring when they go get it, go look for it? So I suppose it is making the thought process focus very much towards can we go with either low input, or can we even go down the organic farming route? And I'd say once the dust settles, which it has on this year's harvest, I suppose, unfortunately, guys go straight into getting autumn crops in the ground. But when they finally have time for reflection and do their sums, I think they very well will be surprised by what's available by going tillage organic.
And in terms then, Martin, of the comparisons, I suppose, between organic and conventional in terms of margins, I suppose, and that's ultimately what it comes down to. People aren't doing it for the good of their health; they have to make a living.
Yeah.
How do they stack up in terms of that financial comparison?
Okay, well, look, if we take, for example, at the Grain Forum, actually, I think it was Kieran Collins, he presented some average 5-year yield results over the last 5 years of the various different crops. So what I took was the average spring oat yield was 7.2 tons per hectare, which is a 2.9 ton per acre crop. So if we keep it in acres. Now, believe it or not, using the Teagasc figures on the cost and returns, the gross margin for a 2.9 ton per acre yield would be 292 euros an acre, so just shy of 300. Okay. Now, if we take an organic grown crop of spring oats and we say a yield of 1.8 ton per acre, there would be growers getting anywhere from 1.5 or 1.6 tons to 2.1 or 2 tons grown organically. So I've been conservative enough. So if we take 1.8 tons per acre, and we factor in the premium that's available for organic oats this year, which is in or around 420 euros a ton. And we do the very same comparison, and we take away the costs, which are considerably cheaper. Obviously, we don't have the fertilizer and the sprays. We actually end up with a gross margin almost 300 euros an acre higher. The gross margin would be 575 euros an acre, as opposed to 292 in the conventional. So that's quite a difference there, Michael. And that doesn't include any organic payments through any organic farming scheme.
That's exactly what I was going to ask you. So there's no payments either side, because obviously not only is the organic scheme money coming, but the entitlements are on top of that again, which is something else.
Yeah, just to add to that, if you were to work that out for your 100-acre farmer, that's 30,000 more gross margin, plus his 15,000 if you wanted to add on the scheme. That's 45,000 euros an acre better off.
But obviously it's never quite as simple as that though, Martin, I don't think.
Yeah.
From the point of view of, you said 420 euros a ton for the organic oats. Is that for feed or for food? And if it's for food, can everybody get that?
Okay, so that's a contract with Flahavens, right? And at the moment the contracts with Flahavens are full. We might discuss markets maybe in a few moments, but what I would say is, even if I did the figures there, and let's just say that farmer was forced to sell it with no premium, and we'll say was forced to sell it at the same price that I did in the analysis there, that it'd be 280 euros a ton, this year's harvest price, would say, for non-contract oats, okay? You would still end up with a margin of 323 euros an acre. So that's still about 30 euros an acre ahead. So that just shows you where things are at in terms of the situation we're in because of, I suppose, the fertilizer.
But obviously then, sorry, the last one, and not to keep poking holes in it, because this, I suppose, if I was a farmer, I'd be kind of thinking, yes, but. And there probably is the last.
I was one of those not too long ago, Michael.
There you go. I'm poking it here now. So to poke it a little bit further, going, you can't grow organic oats every year on every acre. There has to be a degree of a rotation. And just in terms of when you're working it out, can a farmer work out the rotation so that he can maintain the income off every acre, or does some of that land end up in kind of a building phase so he can get an organic oats from everything? How does that work, do you think, or where will it end up?
Yeah, well, this is kind of the idea of, I suppose, of the in-conversion payment being that bit higher, okay? So it's to cover initial costs as well of, paying certification bodies and so on. But I did a quick analysis there, okay? So, and I just had a look at I talked to a couple of farmers and the rotations, and I suppose these are rotations I might see some tillage farmers who might consider taking the plunge into organics this autumn might consider. So a couple of growers I know of went ahead and joined the organic scheme there in April, and they went ahead and they sowed in a combination crop, a combi crop. And that'd be a mixture of peas and barley and peas and oats. It depends. So, but these are real figures now from one particular farmer, and the costs I asked, like the most expensive cost was the seed. Okay, But when you take into account his gross margin, he found it difficult enough. He really had to be proactive in selling it himself, right? So he got about 315 a ton for his produce, and he got just 2 tons to the acre. Now, so that's about 630 euros an acre of an income stream. And then when he took out his costs, he was still left with a gross margin of 349 euros an acre, Michael. So that's still ahead of our 292 of commercial, say, conventional oats. Now, that's year one of the rotation. What do you do in year two? He can grow a conventional crop of spring oats. And as I mentioned, he'll get his 323 at conventional price, 323 an acre. Then he'll be in year three, so he's fully organic, and now he can start selling his oats. And there are markets there. If he doesn't sell, if he can get the premium, for example, Whites and Armagh are looking for 8,000 or 9,000 ton of oats, his margin then will be back up at 575 an acre. Okay, then you go back to your fertility building crop, back to maybe 340, and then back up again to your 575. So the figures, I think, do stack up over the 5 or 6 years of the rotation. So and I suppose one of the things about any rotation is there has to be a degree of flexibility in it, whether you're a conventional or an organic grower. And the best farmers I know of all are tillage farmers for, adjusting and making tweaks to their rotation. So I do think it's very, very doable.
I suppose the worrying part, and we might just flick back into the markets for a second. And if I was a tillage farmer looking at the organics, they'd be kind of saying, Martin's after telling me now there's a whole heap of people are going to jump into this. Is that market going to get flooded? Because if we remember, only last year when it opened to tillage farmers, the Flahavans who were looking for oats for a long time closed up very quickly. That was kind of done within a few months, and they're now kind of full. Where are markets? And you also did mention that the farmer you talked about a second ago had to market his stuff quite hard in order to get that premium. Where does it all sit for somebody who's going to convert?
Okay, well, look, there's a number of central buyers, obviously. Okay, so we have Irish Organic Feeds in Kinsale, Red Mills there in Kilkenny, Murren's in Longford, and there's lots of smaller operators that are only too happy to buy organic produced feed. Because one of the things about those targets I've mentioned is, we're aiming to be up at 7.5% organic by 2027. That'll actually bring 340,000 hectares of land into the system. Okay, and in terms of number of farmers, God knows, but like the amount of extra livestock producers that are going to be depending on organic feed in their system. And rather than paying at the moment, it's currently about €1,000 a ton to import organic feed. Okay, the organic poultry sector is paying about €1,200 a ton for organic feed to be imported. If we could replace an awful lot of that imports with Irish grown produce ourselves that we can grow and maybe supply it for less money than that, obviously. So it's a win-win for the Irish grower. They're still getting a very good premium, and it's a win-win for the end user. That's just one example of where markets are going. Okay. If we take, for example, there's about 160, believe it or not, micro bakeries in the country at the minute. And a lot of those small bakeries are looking for organic sources of ingredient and flour. So I get back to what you're saying. There is a lot of proactiveness required by the farmer themselves to source these markets. Maybe that's something we could look at as well in helping, Teagasc could look at is more farm to farm linkages, how we can encourage it and make that grow and develop, But certainly there's huge potential, Michael. And I suppose we can be creatures of habit. The Irish psyche could be this little fear of resistance to change, and to convince ourselves it's not worthwhile. I think we need to change our mindset and go for it.
So, Martin, that all sounds very convincing. There seems to be lots of markets there. There seems to be money in the system. That all sounds brilliant. It's not without its challenges, though, in terms of, you're getting rid of fertilizers, you're getting rid of weed control. You visited some of these farms over the last little while. I mean, what sort of real challenges are they coming up against?
Well, look, I suppose one of the things I remember doing before I actually went for an interview for the job I got was I asked about 5 different growers, what do you associate the word organic tillage with? And of course, the one word that came back was weeds, and the other one was dirt. And this is, I suppose, the challenge is weeds and weed control, I would say, is one of the initial challenges, okay? But I think you're going to have to change the mindset first. So if you want to look at perfectly pristine crops with not a weed in sight, organic farming is not for you in the first place. You have to have a certain mindset. So it comes down to then, putting up with some weeds, but obviously from a management point of view, you will do everything in your power to reduce the weed burden on crops, because you want to make it profitable and you want to grow a successful crop as you can, whether you're organic or conventional. But so look, weeds is one challenge, but there are ways around it. There's a lot of machinery there now capable of doing, inter-row hoeing and so on, and increased seed rates. So, I would say if anyone's placed to get around this, it's the tillage technical, the technical tillage grower. They're so well equipped and they're so, they've got the skill set to do it. So you will think of innovative ways of beating the system without having to resort to chemistry. And I suppose the other one then is getting nitrogen into the system will be a challenge. Some of us are lucky enough, some growers, that we have a ready made source of organic manures maybe on our doorstep. If you're up close to, Monaghan, Cavan, you could be near to the poultry manure supplies. But don't forget, for organic growing, if you're using poultry manure, it has to be from it has to be kind of a, what would you say, non-indoor bird. So it has to be free range units or organic units is the only type of poultry manure you can use, which you can use any farmyard manure from straw bed farmyard manure from any farmer, and you can use cattle slurry. So you may well have to go look outside the farmyard gate, obviously, to try and get sources of nitrogen in the system via manures. Not all of us are lucky enough, but if you're located relatively close to one of the dairy processing facilities, dairy processing sludge is actually an excellent source of phosphorus and a nice bit of nitrogen too. So that's one of the challenges, though, will be getting the nitrogen and I suppose maintaining fertility into the system, because it's all well and good, harvesting crops, but if you're not putting enough organic manure back in to meet the offtakes, you could run into trouble. So just like a conventional system, you have to match your offtakes.
Sure. So just in terms of, is it all duck and no dinner in the sense of, does a grower have to go 100% into it, or is there any way that maybe some of our larger tillage growers can partially convert some of their land, or partially convert some of their holding, I suppose, but have some of it organic and have some of it conventional and still farm away? Can that happen?
Yes, this is one of the great things, is that, so I would have a number of growers who are looking at this option. So what you can do is, take the 200-acre farmer, that farmer could just decide to take 40 or 50 acres, a block of land, and put it into the organic farming scheme and go partially organic. Now, the only thing that farmer must do differently on that land is they can't grow the same species of crop on that 40 or 50 acre block as they do on the under 150 acres. So if I'm growing spring barley and winter wheat and winter oats on part of my farm, I can't grow those three crops on the piece I put in organic. So other than that, that's not a huge problem or issue for a lot of farmers. I would say they can think around that cleverly, and put in a specific rotation on the organic part of their farm. So I see it as another crop option. I really do, for the larger farmer. You don't have to go completely organic, but just, it's definitely a very viable alternative, I would say.
Well, thanks, Martin, for all of that. And for one final question to you, in terms of how does a farmer get a little bit more information about what's required to change over from conventional to organic? So
what I would say is, well, first of all, Teagasc has taken on now six, full-time, they're the first point of contact, they're full-time advisors now at organic. Okay, so there's 6 organic advisors. There's the 3 specialists, myself and my colleagues, Elaine Levy and Joe Kelleher. So Teagasc is very well equipped now going forward. You've also obviously got the Consultants Association. And then what I would say is the 2 organic certification bodies are an excellent first stop to ask for advice, and they'll guide you through the process of conversion. And it's quite simple, really. You just fill out a document. It's a prepared document they'll have for you, whichever organic body you go to, and you just, you state the type of farming you've been doing until now, your crops, your rotations, and then what you propose to do going forward. It's a very straightforward process. Someone then from the certification body will come out, inspect you, and then certify you, and away you go. It's that straightforward. So I'd say, first point of contact, one of the Teagasc organic advisors, or else straight to the certification bodies, and they're extremely helpful, very professional, and they'll set you on your way. Okay, perfect. Martin, listen, thanks very much for all of that. There's certainly
lots to think about, certainly when we go back and think about the margins from both systems. And we might come back again to you and chat a little bit more about constructing rotations and some of that fertility building through the system. So Martin, thanks again.
Thanks, Michael.
So that's it for this week. And my thanks to Martin for joining me on the podcast. Just a couple of areas I want to mention before I sign off for today. In order to understand the aspects of the podcast which are most appealing and beneficial to you, I would greatly appreciate if you could take 3 to 4 minutes to complete a survey. The details of this are in the podcast notes. Finally, don't forget, if you enjoyed the podcast, then recommend it to a friend or colleague. And as always, rate, review, and follow on Apple Podcast or Spotify so you never miss an episode. And for more information, go to teagasc.ie. I'm Michael Hennessy. Thanks for listening. I'll be back next week with more tillage news and advice.